As we walk through life, we encounter times of waiting. Waiting for a door to open, waiting for an answer to a prayer, waiting for a breakthrough. It's not easy, is it? We live in a world where everything moves at lightning speed. We have instant access to information, immediate communication, and conveniences that provide instant gratification. And yet, in the midst of all this rapid progress, there's one thing that remains constant: the need for patience. There are seasons in life when we must wait, whether it's for healing, for direction, for restoration, or for a deeper understanding of God's will for our lives. During these times, we often find ourselves asking, does God even hear my prayers? Does He know what I'm going through? Does He see how badly I want this to happen? I know I've asked these very questions at times. There have been seasons in my own life when I felt like I was waiting for something to happen, but nothing seemed to be moving. And it's during those times of silence that our faith is put to the test. We begin to question God's involvement in our situation. We wonder if He has forgotten us. But let me tell you something today that I have learned through years of walking with God. God knows exactly what you're waiting for. He is fully aware of every need, every desire, and every longing in your heart. And He hasn't forgotten you. As I look back on the times in my life when I've had to wait, I now see them as pivotal moments. At the time, I thought I was being left behind, that God was moving in everyone else's life, but not mine. But what I didn't realize then was that God was doing something in me while I was waiting. He was preparing me for the future that I couldn't yet see. His timing wasn't just delayed, it was perfect. I think about the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. After being delivered from Egypt, they were led into the desert for 40 years. 40 years. Can you imagine the frustration, the confusion, the longing for something more? And yet, God was with them every step of the way, guiding them, providing for them, teaching them, and preparing them for the promised land. It wasn't that God didn't hear their cries or see their struggles. No, He knew exactly what they needed, and He was shaping them in the waiting. The same is true for you today. God knows exactly what you're waiting for, and He is working in ways you can't see to bring His perfect plan to pass. I remember a time in my life when I was praying for a significant change. I felt like I had waited long enough, but things weren't happening as I expected. I was frustrated and discouraged. And in the midst of that, I was reminded of the verse in Psalm 139:16, which says, "Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." This verse tells us that God knows the beginning from the end. He knew everything about us before we were born. He knows the plans He has for us. And even in our waiting, He is working, He is preparing, and He is refining us. Even when we can't see it, God is actively working in the background, orchestrating every detail of our lives. In fact, He is working in the very things that seem like delays. The times we feel most impatient, most uncertain, are often the moments when God is shaping us the most. I want to encourage you today to take heart. God knows what you're waiting for, and He hasn't forgotten you. His plan is unfolding at the perfect time, and His timing is always better than our own. I know it's hard to wait. I've been there. We all have. But when we trust that God knows what we need and that He is moving in His perfect time, we begin to experience peace in the waiting. It's not about knowing when or how God will answer. It's about trusting that He is working behind the scenes, even when we don't see it. The waiting doesn't mean God is silent. It means He is preparing something better than we could ever imagine. So today, wherever you are in your waiting, trust that God knows what you need. He sees you. He hears you. And He is preparing something extraordinary for you. Trust His timing, rest in His promises, and know that He is never far from you. God's plan for your life is unfolding in ways you can't yet see. But His timing will always be perfect. There are a few things more difficult than waiting, aren't there? When we face uncertainty, when our hearts long for something, and when it seems like God is taking His time to answer our prayers, the struggle can feel overwhelming. We find ourselves in seasons where nothing seems to move, and we can't help but wonder if God is really listening. If you've been there, I understand. I have too. There was a season in my own life where I faced a great deal of uncertainty. I was praying, seeking God's direction, longing for answers, but it felt like nothing was happening. There were days when I wondered if I had missed something, or if God had simply forgotten about me. But over time, through much prayer and reflection, I began to see something that changed everything for me. The truth that God's timing is not bound by our understanding, and that His ways are not the same as ours. You see, I was so focused on my own timeline, the way I thought things should go, that I missed what God was doing in the unseen. I remember being reminded of a powerful truth from Isaiah 55, 8, 9, where God says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." That passage hit me like a wave, reminding me that God is sovereign and that His plan is always more perfect than anything I could imagine. His ways are higher, His timing is better, and His understanding goes beyond what we can even comprehend. This was something I had to learn the hard way. Through years of waiting, through seasons of feeling like I wasn't moving forward. But through those seasons, God was teaching me to trust Him more deeply, to lean not on my own understanding, but to rely on His wisdom. And as I reflect back, I see how His perfect plan was unfolding, even when I couldn't see it. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn was that just because I couldn't see what God was doing didn't mean He wasn't working. There were times when I was so focused on the delay, so consumed with the wait, that I failed to recognize the ways God was preparing me for something greater. God works behind the scenes, and while we may feel like nothing is happening, He is always at work, orchestrating every detail for our good. I think about the story of Joseph in the Bible. Joseph had a dream that he would one day rise to a place of prominence, to a position where he could provide for and save many people. But what happened after he received that dream? He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and wrongfully imprisoned. Now, if you were Joseph, how would you have responded? Wouldn't you have questioned God? Wouldn't you have wondered why things were going from bad to worse? Yet Joseph in his faith remained steadfast. He trusted that God knew the bigger picture, even when it seemed like his life was spiraling in the opposite direction of his dream. And in the end, God's plan unfolded in the most beautiful way, bringing Joseph exactly to the place he had promised. And Joseph could see that all the hardships he had endured were part of God's greater purpose. We're called to trust in God's unseen work, even when it feels like nothing is happening. His timing isn't always easy to understand, but it is always perfect. God knows what we need when we need it, and He is never late. It reminds me of the story of the Israelites wandering in the desert, waiting for the day they would enter the promised land. Their journey was long, filled with trials and struggles, but God was preparing them. He was teaching them to rely on Him. And even in their waiting, He was shaping them into the people He needed them to be for the promises to come to fruition. And you know, there are times in our lives when we need that same kind of shaping. We want things to move quickly. We want immediate answers. But sometimes God allows us to wait because He is refining us, strengthening our faith, and preparing us for what is ahead. In those moments, He is teaching us to trust in His perfect timing. As I look back on my own waiting periods, I can now see how God used those seasons to deepen my faith. I can see how His timing was never a delay, but a part of the process that would lead to something better than I had envisioned. Maybe you're facing a similar situation right now, feeling like you're waiting on something that never seems to come, or that the answer to your prayer is just beyond your reach. I want to remind you that God sees you. He knows exactly what you're waiting for. And while the answer may not come as quickly as you'd like, it is coming. He is at work in your life, even in the waiting. I encourage you today to hold on to that truth. Trust that God's timing is always right and that He is working behind the scenes on your behalf. While you may not see the outcome yet, you can have peace knowing that He is orchestrating everything for your good. Keep your eyes on Him, trust in His perfect plan, and rest in the assurance that He knows exactly what you need. You don't have to see the full picture to trust that God is working. His ways are higher than ours, and His timing is always perfect. So when you find yourself in a season of waiting, take a deep breath, surrender your anxieties, and trust in God's timing. Trust that He is not only working for you, but He is working in you. And when the time is right, everything will fall into place. There's something deeply unsettling about walking a path when you can't see the end. It's one thing when you have a map, a guide, or a clear destination. You know where you're headed, and you know that the steps you take are leading you in the right direction. But what about when you can't see the path? What happens when you step into the unknown? When the road ahead is unclear, and when you feel as though you're stumbling in the dark, hoping for a light to guide your way? If you've ever been in that place, and I suspect most of us have at some point, you know, the discomfort that comes with uncertainty. You know, the fear that creeps in telling you that you've lost your way. And I've certainly been there too. There have been seasons in my life where I've prayed with fervor. I've believed, I've worked hard, but the path ahead still seemed blurry. I remember vividly one particular season in my life where everything felt out of control. I had no clear direction, no solid answers to my prayers. And I wondered if God had somehow missed the memo about my situation. I was deeply frustrated, feeling like I was trying my hardest to move forward, but nothing seemed to shift. That's when God began to gently remind me that His plan is often revealed one step at a time, not all at once. I recall being reminded of the story of Abraham, a man who was called by God to leave everything behind and go to a land that God would show him. God didn't give Abraham a detailed map. In fact, He didn't even tell him the final destination. He simply said, "If you go to the land, I will show you." Genesis 12:1. Can you imagine that? The father of the faith, the man who was promised to become the father of many nations, had to trust God without knowing where he was going. There was no GPS, no road signs, and no clear instructions. Abraham had to walk by faith, step by step, even when he couldn't see where it was leading. And you know what? He did it. He trusted God with the unknown, and that trust was counted to him as righteousness. This truth hit me like a wave. I was so focused on the destination that I was missing the beauty of the journey. I wanted the clarity, the answers, the roadmap for the future, but God was asking me to trust Him with each individual step along the way. He was teaching me that sometimes we don't need to see the full picture in order to move forward. We just need to trust that the one who holds the map is with us every step of the way. As I began to accept this truth, something remarkable happened. My anxiety started to fade. I realized that while I couldn't see the end of the road, I didn't have to see it. I simply had to trust the one who was leading me. I also thought about the Israelites. When they left Egypt, they were heading to the Promised Land, but the journey took 40 years. 40 years. Imagine the doubts, the frustration, and the confusion they must have felt wandering through the wilderness, unsure of when or if they would ever reach their destination. But God was with them every step of the way, providing, guiding, and shaping them. It wasn't just about getting to the Promised Land. It was about what God was doing in them as they waited. The journey itself was part of the plan. And so it is with us. God's plan isn't just about reaching the destination. It's about the process of transformation that happens along the way. We can become so fixated on what's next, on where we're going, that we miss the lessons God is teaching us in the present. God doesn't just care about where we're going. He cares about who we're becoming on the journey. And here's the beautiful thing. Just because we don't see the full path doesn't mean God isn't in control. In fact, in our uncertainty, in our waiting, God is often doing His most profound work in us. I look back on the times in my life when I couldn't see the way forward, and I realize now that those were the times when God was drawing me closer to Him. He was teaching me to rely on Him, to trust His timing, and to have faith that He knew the way, even when I didn't. I was learning to walk by faith and not by sight. And that's exactly what God is inviting you to do today. Maybe you're in a season of waiting. Maybe you feel like you've been praying and seeking and you still can't see the answers. Maybe you're looking ahead and the road seems unclear and you're asking God, well, what's next? Where are you leading me? If that's you, I want to remind you that God is still at work. He knows what you're waiting for, and He is with you every step of the way. Trust in Him, even when you can't see the path ahead. Hold on to His promise that He will never leave you nor forsake you. And remember that the steps you take today, even if they seem small or insignificant, are part of His greater plan. He is using this season of waiting to prepare you for what is to come. You may not see the path now, but in due time He will reveal it. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to trust that God is leading you, that He has your best interest at heart, and that His timing is always perfect. So today I encourage you to take a step of faith, step into the unknown, trusting that the one who holds the future also holds your hand. Trust that God is in control even when the way forward isn't clear. Let go of the need to understand everything and simply trust that God's plan is unfolding in your life, one step at a time. And know this: as you trust in Him, you will experience His peace, His presence, and His guidance. Your journey may be unclear, but with God by your side, you will always be on the right path. There are seasons in life where we find ourselves standing on the edge of uncertainty, unable to see the way forward, yet deep within us there is this stirring, this quiet assurance that God is doing something unseen, something behind the scenes. This can be one of the hardest aspects of our faith journey because it requires us to let go of the need for immediate answers to relinquish control, and to trust that, even in the silence, God is working. It's like being in the middle of a storm and the winds are howling, the rain is pouring, and you can't see the shore. But somewhere beyond the storm, you know the lighthouse is still there guiding you, even though you can't see it. And that's where faith becomes more than a passive act. It becomes a choice, an act of will, to trust in the character and the promises of God, even when everything around you seems to suggest otherwise. I remember a time when I was facing a particularly challenging season in my life. It was one of those moments when I was praying fervently, asking God for clarity, asking Him to move in my life, to show me the way forward. But the more I prayed, the more I seemed to be stuck in the same place. It was a time when the path ahead was unclear, and it felt like my prayers were bouncing off the ceiling. I wrestled with doubt, fear, and frustration. I thought, God, are you even listening? Why is this taking so long? But in the midst of my frustration, God gently reminded me of a simple yet profound truth. He is always at work, even when I cannot see it. I began to recall the stories in the Bible where God was working behind the scenes, preparing His people for something greater, even when they couldn't perceive it at the time. Consider the life of Joseph. He had a dream of greatness, a vision of his future, but it didn't come to pass in the way he expected. Instead, he was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. It must have felt like the ultimate betrayal, like God had abandoned him. And yet God was at work even in the darkest moments of Joseph's life. The very trials he faced were preparing him for the moment when he would rise to power in Egypt to save his family and many others from famine. God was working in Joseph's life in ways that he couldn't see, shaping him for a purpose far greater than anything he could have imagined. And I've come to realize that, just like Joseph, we too are often walking through seasons of waiting and uncertainty, not knowing how God is working, but trusting that He is. It's in these moments of silence and waiting that God often does some of His deepest work in us. I've learned that the waiting is not wasted. It's not that God is indifferent or passive. No, He is doing 1,000 things behind the scenes that we are unaware of. But He is also doing something in us as we wait. He is shaping our character, strengthening our faith, teaching us perseverance, and refining our trust in His timing. In the waiting, we are becoming more like Christ, learning to lean on Him more fully and to rely on His strength. I remember reading Psalm 37:7, which says, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes." When they carry out their wicked schemes, it struck me that in the waiting we are called to be still, not in passivity, but in action. Waiting is not about sitting idly by. It is about trusting in God's sovereignty, trusting that He is working, even when we cannot see it. We are called to be still before the Lord, to rest in His presence, and to trust that He is always in control. And as we wait, we are reminded of another important truth. God's plan is always worth the wait. It's easy to look at the world around us and feel like we're falling behind, like others are advancing while we are stuck. But God's plan for you is uniquely tailored to you. It's a plan that is perfect for your life, one that aligns with His divine purpose and timing. It may not always look like what you expect, but it will always be better than what you could have imagined. I've learned that waiting on God's timing isn't about being stagnant. It's about being faithful in the present moment, trusting that as we take that step, God is preparing us for what lies ahead. The greatest breakthroughs often come after the longest seasons of waiting. It's in those moments that God is setting the stage for His glory to be revealed in your life. I look back now and see how the waiting seasons in my life were not wasted. They were shaping me, molding me, and preparing me for the work He was going to do in and through me. And I want to tell you today, your waiting is not wasted either. God is at work. He knows what you're waiting for, and He is preparing you for what lies ahead. Trust Him. Rest in Him. Wait patiently for Him, knowing that He is faithful and that His timing is perfect. You may not see it now, but He is moving behind the scenes, working everything together for your good and His glory. As you wait, embrace the peace that comes from trusting Him completely. God is faithful, and His timing will always bring everything together in ways that exceed your expectations. As we conclude this time together, I want to remind you that no matter where you are in your journey, no matter how long the waiting has been or how uncertain the future may seem, you are not alone. God is right there with you. He knows what you're waiting for, and He is working, even when you can't see it. I've shared with you how I've walked through seasons of waiting, seasons where I questioned whether God had forgotten me, and seasons where the waiting felt like it was too much to bear. But every step of the way, God was faithful. He was working behind the scenes, preparing me for what was to come. I can look back now, and I see clearly how His perfect timing was always at work, even when I didn't understand it. In the midst of our waiting, it's so easy to get caught up in doubt. We think that because we don't see immediate results, God isn't listening or that He doesn't care. But I want to challenge that mindset today. Just because you don't see the outcome yet doesn't mean God isn't at work. In fact, God's ways are often much deeper and more far-reaching than we can imagine. His timing is not like our timing. He sees the beginning from the end, and He is orchestrating every detail of your life to bring about His perfect plan. This is where trust becomes vital. Trusting in God's sovereignty means we surrender our need for control, and we let go of the pressure to make things happen on our own timeline. It's about fully embracing the truth that God's plan for our lives is always better than anything we could orchestrate on our own. I've come to learn that there is peace in surrender. The more we trust God with our future, the more we rest in His perfect plan. The more we release our worries and anxieties, the more we experience His peace. I want you to think about something. When we wait on God's timing, we are not just passively waiting. We are actively trusting. We are actively choosing to place our faith in Him. It's not about standing still. It's about moving forward in faith, even when we don't know exactly where the road leads. It's about taking the next step with the confidence that God is with us and that His plan is unfolding in the background. And I want to encourage you today, whatever you are waiting for, to surrender it to God. Take a moment and lay down your anxieties, your frustrations, and your need to control. Trust that God knows what you need and that He will provide at the right time. Trust that His timing is perfect and that He is preparing you for something even greater than you can imagine. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 40:31, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." When we place our hope and trust in God, He renews our strength. He gives us the endurance to keep moving forward, even in the waiting. And that, my friends, is where we find peace, where we find rest. Not in knowing the outcome, not in having everything figured out, but in knowing that God is with us and that He has a perfect plan. I want to leave you with this thought. Whatever it is that you are waiting for today, trust that God is already working in it. Trust that He is moving even when you can't see the full picture. He has not forgotten you. He sees your heart. He hears your prayers. And His timing will always be perfect as you walk through your journey of waiting. Remember to rest in God's peace. Trust in His sovereignty. Keep your eyes on Him and know that He is leading you, step by step, into a future that is far greater than anything you could have planned for yourself. So I encourage you today, whatever you're waiting for, whatever you're praying for, give it to God. Trust Him with your future. Trust Him with your future. Trust Him with your life. And as you do, may His peace, which surpasses all understanding, guard your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. Let God's perfect timing bring everything together in His way, and watch as He unfolds His beautiful plan for your life. Take that step of faith today, knowing that the one who holds the future is also holding you in His hands.